Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for my keynote. Um, I'm going to assume that everyone can hear me and everyone can see because we had a little tech check before and everything was working there. So um, I imagine if you cannot hear or see me, then it might be something on your end. So have a little fiddle with your settings. Um, Now, despite being a guest of honor and despite this being a keynote, I am very aware that not everyone is going to know who I am. So, oh no. Oh, thank God. I thought my keyboard had disconnected. Anyway, um, this is me. Here I am. I wanted to include some cute pictures for you to look at while I give you a rundown of who I am and what I do. Um, so yeah, I'm Helen. I go by she, he, and they pronouns, and like many people my age, I have a whole lot of jobs. I am primarily a sensitivity consultant, and I specialize in race and racism, which means that when creators are concerned that something they're working on could be problematic, they can come to me and I can help them out with that. So this can be things like a white author writing about a black character and wanted to make sure that they haven't accidentally fallen into racist stereotypes. It can be a TTRPG creator wanting feedback on how they've handled different races or settings in their world building. Um, or I've done a couple of sort of comic stuff where they want me to review their character designs. And a lot of the visual stuff is about hair, actually. Is this realistic natural black hair, that kind of thing. I've recently been featured in a few news outlets talking about what sensitivity reading is. So that includes things like The Guardian, Sky News, the BBC's One Show, which I'm very aware that this is like an international audience. So the One Show is like a tea time show that's like full of like light news. It's not like a serious thing. It's like, oh, here's some fluffy culture stuff. So that was cool. That was weird. Also, if you are looking at my card right now and you're trying to follow me on Twitter, I'm currently locked precisely because of these media appearances. Just in case, like nothing bad has happened to me or anything, but you'll have to send a following request if you want to follow me right now. But I'll be unlocking next week. Anyway, in addition to my consultation work, I am the head of inclusion for Rusty Quill, which is a UK-based podcast company, which is probably best known for the Magnus Archives, which is a horror fiction anthology show. I'm also a voice actor for Rusty Quill, and I host their chat show Enthusiasm, which is basically the opposite of Magnus in that it's a bunch of people talking about nice things and having a good time. Nobody has a good time in Magnus. Anyway, what else do I do? I'm also a writer. So obviously I have a Patreon. I write primarily about uh, weird relationships, magic, fantasy, horror. I have a real thing about like assassins and mercenaries and stuff. I feel like I'm really interested in how a violent profession can affect one's relationships with oneself and others, but that's a whole other thing. Um, I also offer editorial services. Um, I'm so sorry. I'm really aware that some of you have no clue who I am. So that's why I'm going into so much detail. Um, I guess last thing, I also stream on Twitch with my best friend on Wednesdays, but that's for fun more than anything professional. We're currently playing Mass Effect 3, and we're getting towards the end, and it's all going to be very sad. So now you know who I am, hopefully. So let's get stuck into the topic that I've chosen, which is content warnings for audio fiction. Because that is one of the subjects that I feel like I'm like a proper expert in, because I've helped to build the processes and conventions of content warnings across an entire podcast company. So when I was asked to do a keynote, I was like, what do I know really well? And I know this really well. So that's why we're doing this. So first things first, what is a content warning? So simply put, it's exactly what it sounds like. It is a note from the creator or producer to the audience to let them know about any potentially harmful content in the media they are about to consume. This will help the audience to make an informed choice about whether to continue on. It doesn't have to be like a super serious thing. It can just be if the content warnings are indicating that it's going to be like really heavy content and you're not really in the mood, then you can just be like, okay, I will not engage with that right now. I shall come back to it later. An interesting thing that I realized as I was writing this is that, in my view, a content warning is slightly different to a trigger warning, because for me, trigger warnings are generally used specifically for topics related to mental health and trauma, whereas content warnings cover a much broader spectrum of subjects. Speaking of, here's a content warning for the rest of this presentation. Because of the subject matter, I am going to be discussing some distressing topics. So I'm going to be taking you through some examples of content warnings and giving context about what they were there for. So that's going to include things like references to violence and death, mental illness, including depression, suicide, PTSD, sexual assault. I'm going to talk about the experience of being triggered, and there's going to probably be a brief reference to school shootings. So please do feel free to duck out at any time for any reason. Take care of yourself. Like, just, it's okay. I can't even see how many people are in the room right now, so don't worry. You just, if you're getting a little upset, you can always press the X button. So moving on, in terms of what a content warning is, here are some mainstream content warnings. So up in the top left, this is a screenshot I took from Netflix for Saw, the first Saw film, and they've rated it 18 for violence and injury detail. Top right, we've got Borderlands 3, which I've been playing with my best friend, and they've rated it mature 17 plus for blood and gore, intense violence, sexual themes, and strong language. Bottom, I've just wondered whether I've got my directions right or wrong. Never mind. You know which ones I'm explaining them, so it doesn't matter. Bottom left are the film ratings for Everything Everywhere All at Once, as in the British ones, because instead of doing, what is it that Americans do? I think it's like PG-13, R, NC-17, something like that. But over here, it's UPG 12, 15, 18. So anyway, the British film standards, the British film standards, something or other. They gave this a 15. They said it has strong violence, sex references, and language in it. And so that was their content warning for it. And then in the bottom right, we just have that big old stamp, parental advisory, explicit content, which you're going to find on albums that have a lot of swearing in them. So these are the kind of content warnings that you're going to be coming across from day to day. And I'm just giving you these examples to show that this is not a new concept at all. But what is new is the level of detail that we've started including, which is often much more comprehensive. And I'm not entirely sure where it started, but I do find that it's much more prevalent, this culture of detailed content warnings, in things like podcasts, fan content, and tabletop gaming content. I find that there is a much more involved process there than you generally get in everyday life. So audio content can be very visceral. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why it's so important for podcasts, because I feel like when you are watching something, it's in front of you and you can see that it is separate to you. But when you're listening to something and it's coming in through your ears, I feel like it has a different impact on your psyche. So I've chosen two separate episodes from different Rusty Quill productions where I've helped to do the content warnings. The top one, RQG, that's for Rusty Quill Gaming. That is the biggest project I was involved in. I play a 6'6" orc. And this top one, Mag 186, that is one of the Magnus Archives ones. So I'm just going to talk you through what these content notes are and why they're there. So let's start with the RQG one on the top. So underground tunnels. That's there because we are indeed walking through a lot of tunnels. We're underground, and it's there so that people who would feel claustrophobic can be aware. So they can be like, oh, okay, so that's where this is set. And if they are feeling especially fragile, fine. Being hunted / stalked. Again, this is a particular fear or phobia, I think, that many people have. And again, it's to sort of indicate tone of this episode. Undead and skeletons, that comes under sort of an indicator that this is horror themes are going to start to come into the episode. Threats of death and violence. It can be extremely, how should we put this? Off-putting, maybe, to hear people threatening each other, being spoken directly into your ears. Blood and bleeding. Lots of people have a phobia about blood. And then just straight up violence, to be like, people are going to attack each other in this episode. Be aware. And then we've got discussions of classism. So that was there because frankly, because it's a British podcast and class is still a huge part of our culture, but and it was incorporated into the campaign here. Discussions of non-consensual touch is a really interesting one because I had to think really hard about the wording of that, because my character, something is touching my character's face and it's really horrible and it makes her feel horrible, but it's not sexual or flirtatious in any way, and it's not particularly violent. It's just so I was like, how do I phrase this? And I ended up with non-consensual touch. And vampirism, again, horror themes, blood, letting people know there's people consuming blood in here. Then we've got mentions of apocalypse, which is something that we've been using more often since lockdown, I think, because this sense of apocalypse, end of world, end of days kind of thing is, I think, becoming more prevalent since the pandemic started. So that's something that we're aware of now. Mentions of death. People might know someone who has died recently and don't want to be reminded. Fire, people have a phobia of fire. Freezing, people have a phobia of that. Food, people have eating disorders and issues with food. Animal death, similar to death, people's pets might have died, that kind of thing. Then the last one we've got here is sound effects. So low drone, that's there for people who are sensitive to long continuous noises. Dripping for repetitive noises. Creaking and rattling, much the same. Hoarse breathing and whispering, that's people who are sensitive to that kind of noise. Fire, again, for people who have had negative experiences with fire. And then occasional beeping, which is often, at least when I was directly involved, the occasional beeping was usually there to just be like, we did a swear and we beeped it out. But there are lots and lots of different conditions where sudden, loud, or high-pitched noises can trigger an illness or a condition. So that's why that's in there. The next one, Mag 186. This is one that's much more about mental health. This is a character who is essentially in dialogue with himself, and he is talking to himself about his own mental health and why he feels the things that he does, and how it's affected him throughout his life. So that's why depression and sadness is there. Isolation is there because that is a major theme of the episode, in terms of he is completely alone. And that is an experience that lots of people have unpleasant associations with. Emotional manipulation. Hearing someone be manipulated when you yourself has been manipulated can also be a nasty reminder, if we put it that way. Guilt and self-blame. Again, there's this idea of I think a lot of us have been there, where we will be like, oh, this is all my fault, and that is what this character is doing there. And so we're letting people know, be aware that this kind of self-talk is going to be happening, and we don't want to set it off in your own brain as well. So we're letting you know. And then we've got a big list of mentions, which are things that, they're not a major theme, but they have come up. So I've got things like mild body horror. Again, people can get really easily grossed out. So that's there. Emotional abuse. Again, that's a reminder of something traumatic. Same for parental death. Same for dysfunctional and toxic relationships, especially familial dysfunctional relationships. Grief. If you are currently or recently bereaved, mentions of grief may, take you out of it. Ableism. Any ism that's in an episode we will warn for, because you don't want to be surprised generally with that kind of content. Discussion of suffering. That is, I think this character is talking about like everyone on Earth suffering, which again, not pleasant, something to warn for. And then death, murder, and potential suicide. Death and murder, again, good to be aware that that is part of the content. And potential suicide is there for mental health and trauma triggering reasons. So, that is me running through these examples, mostly from memory, and I'm quite pleased with that. So, the next most important question is, how do you know when to include a content warning? And these are the guidelines that I use when I'm considering content warnings, not just for podcasts, but for anything. So I ask myself, would a reasonable person expect this content to trigger a phobia? So, for example, if characters are fighting massive spiders, I'm going to put a warning for arachnophobia because there are spiders. Would a reasonable person expect this content to remind a person of trauma? As we've seen previously, things to do with mental health, I am usually going to want to put a content warning for, because some of the time, relating to someone else, to a fictional character going through what you're going through, sometimes that can be helpful, and sometimes it can make you feel worse. So that's the second one. And then the third one is, would a reasonable person expect this content to otherwise cause predictable distress? So that's things like loud noises, auditory issues, that kind of thing. Oh, that's one. Also, a fairly recent one is misophonia warnings. So that's like when there is very loud or obvious sort of eating and drinking noises. Now, not everybody who has misophonia has the specific one, but I certainly do. And when I can hear like slurping and drinking, it gives me such a visceral flee response. I can't stand it. I started to listen to a show, I think it was called 12 Ghosts, and it was set in a pub, and people were coming into the pub and having drinks, and they kept having the drinking sound effects, and I couldn't finish it. I stopped like halfway through the second episode because I was like, God, everyone in here is drinking. I can't do it. So yeah, so these are the general guidelines that I ask myself when I'm thinking about content warnings. So the next slide is where I'm going to touch a little bit on sexual assault. So here is an example of what happens without adequate content warnings. This is a tweet that I put out last year. I'll read out the tweet and then I'll discuss it. So, hey gang, quick heads up about Luckiest Girl Alive on Netflix. The description says it's about a school shooting, but the story is also very much about rape and PTSD. It's done very realistically and graphically. If it triggered me, which it did, first time that's happened to me since 2020, I'm sure others will have similar or worse experiences with it. I've had to stop watching for now. Anyway, just wanted to do a PSA as it really caught me off guard. Take care of yourselves. So, I don't know if anyone else has watched this film. I still haven't finished it. I'm probably not going to now at this point. But the film on Netflix was described along the lines of a survivor from a school shooting essentially confronts someone who is giving a false narrative about what happened. And it's about, I had the impression that it was going to be about finding out the truth about the violence and what happened and what this situation was. But actually, what it was really exploring was the PTSD of the main character who had been assaulted, and why that caused her to react in the way that she did and to act in the way that she did. But those scenes were so, as I say here, it was so realistic and so graphic that I found myself like, and because it had been so long since something had triggered me, I didn't know what was happening at first, and I was sitting there and I was feeling worse and worse, and I was starting to worry about things, and I started finding myself on the brink of tears, and I was like, what's going on? And at first I was just like, it's your mental illness. But then I paused the film and I sat there and I was like, oh my God, that's what it was. um and that's when I made this tweet, because I was like, it has been like that is a really big reaction for me to have, because I'm really, really lucky in that it's quite difficult actually to trigger me, which is why I'm quite good at doing content warnings, because it's unlikely that things are going to upset me to any real extent. And you know, if you can't do that, that is absolutely fine. Like I say, this is just why I tend to be good at picking these things out. But so my thought process was, if it has reminded me of pain in this way, it's going to be worse for other people. So I just wanted to give this example as you know, as a personal experience of what can happen when something isn't properly warned for. Because what Netflix had said, um, it said rating 18, sexual violence, threat. And that did not at all prepare me for the scope of what was shown. And so that is why I am often advocating a move towards more detailed content warnings. So if I were to do this, if I were to do a content warning for this, I would say graphic sexual violence or extended scenes of sexual violence, that kind of thing. Yeah. So a real life example for you. So we are going to move on to further resources. So these are some things you can look at if you want to see how other people are doing it. So obviously there's the most famous one of Does the Dog Die? Which is a website where lots and lots of people basically it's like if you type in a book or a film or a TV show, it has like a big long checklist of things like does the dog die? Or is there are there insects in this? Or is there claustrophobia in this? Or does someone get buried alive? That kind of thing. And people click yes or no, and they can add explanations. So that is a really useful resource to see if you yourself are trying to figure out if something is going to be triggering for you or not. Then we've got unconsenting media, which is specifically about scenes of sexual violence and assault. And you can, again, search there to see specifics of various kinds of content. And then the last one I've included, which I feel like we're probably all familiar with, or the majority of us will be, which is Archive of Our Own, which is a fan fiction, essentially a database. It just records any fan fiction that anyone uploads there. And there is an entire tagging culture that has developed around Archive of Our Own. There is where not only do you have the main archival warnings that you can use, so things like major character death, graphic violence, rape slash non-con, and I think there's another one there. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they've got like those main categories. Then under that, they've got ratings, so you can choose from explicit, mature, teen, general. And then after that, there's completely customizable tag. Did I say that right? Customizable, yes. There's completely customizable tags, and you can include whatever is in your story in there, and those can be things that might be triggering, or they can be things that people might be looking for, which is why in the way that Archive of Our Own works, you can choose to include tags or exclude tags. So if you do want to see something, you can look for it. And if you don't want to see something, you can exclude it, which is really, really useful. And so, but it also means that people often make jokes or like almost write a diary entry via tagging. And I feel like there's a really good like sociological essay in that's titled something like the culture of tagging on Archive of Our Own, a holistic study or something, but that's really interesting, and that again is an interesting site to browse through. Just pick any fandom and see what kind of things are being warned for and what kind of language is being used. And yeah, these three are some recommendations for looking into the topic a bit more and seeing how other people use them. So, we've talked about a lot of heavy and serious stuff in this keynote. So I did want to end on something a little bit lighter. So speaking of Archive of Our Own, here are some fun tags. I'm going to read them out in case you're not watching. So top one, I know nothing and you can't prove that I do. Second one, please don't join the military. Third one, which I feel very much in my heart. Is it canon? No. Is it true? Absolutely. Goose typical violence is the next one, which I assume is related to Untitled Goose Game, but it may well be that geese are just universally accepted as being some of the most aggressive beings in the universe. Relationships, your mother / the author, which seems very very confrontational. But he killed people, yeah, and he looked good doing it. That's my boy Will Graham in Hannibal. And then we've got additional tags down here, graphic depictions of an old man being sad, which is all of my favorite media. And then, of course, big shout out to this iconic tag from the Magnus Archives, Canon Typical Worms. We love those worms in the show. So, that is a quick rundown of what content warning is and how I would advise using them. Thanks for watching. We have like 20 minutes left, so if you've got any questions or anything, you can ask them in the chat. Since this is a keynote, I don't feel like it necessarily has to be about content warnings. You can ask me anything about like myself and my work, or what it's like being a sensitivity consultant, or anything like that. But yeah, that's what we're doing. I'm gonna stop sharing. Okay.
Hey, we've got a question for you already.
Ooh.
Do you keep a running list or spreadsheet of content that could be noted, or do you reassess with each episode or story?
Ooh, so I personally don't keep that database, but we have one over at Rusty Quill. There is a content warning database that we do use, and every time we use a new one, it gets added. And they're under sort of general categories, like we have a specific category for like horror themes. We've got a miscellaneous category as well, which is just for like the weirder ones that are important but also don't fit anywhere else. So yes, I would recommend keeping a record of them, because as times go on, you will become I think more accustomed to doing content warnings as well, because you will become more familiar with whatever you're making. And so when we were doing Stella Firma, which is a science fiction improv podcast, almost every single episode I was like, I think it was bullying / taunting, alcohol and alcohol abuse, because one of the characters who was in every episode was really mean and always drunk. So yeah, you will become more familiar with content warnings as you go through the process of doing them. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Here's another one for you.
Mm-hmm.
Misha asks, something that I've noticed on some fiction are content warnings that combine real and serious CWs with goofier ones. And I've
Mm.
always been torn about whether this helps lighten the mood or makes too much light of the concept. Do you think it's generally a good thing or disrespectful?
I think it's gonna depend on context, actually. Because like I don't. Okay, two things. A, I think it depends on context, and B, I think it depends on personal preference. So I think that in a serious work of fiction that is going out to a very large audience, I think that content warnings should be taken seriously, if you are like doing it professionally. Um, Even though sometimes the urge is there are so many times where I've wanted to make a joke in the content warnings, but I'm like, no, this is serious business. I remember, I can't remember which Magnus episode it was, but I was like, I kind of want to warn for academia. But yeah, so I think in professional contexts, the content warnings should be taken seriously. Not so much for fan fiction, because like almost by definition, that's something that you do for fun. And I think as long as you've got the appropriate serious tags in there, um, you can include whatever else you want. Uh, that's my personal feeling on it anyway. But I'm not the be all and end all. And you can feel however you want to feel about it.
Thank you. I've got a question for you, actually. I
Ooh.
noticed that you've got so there's discussions of and mentions of, and what's the line between them?
Ooh, that's a good question. So discussions of, in my mind, is if there is an actual like extended conversation about something. Um, and mentions of is if it just comes up once or twice. Um, and but a lot of the difficulties of content warnings is that it is often a judgment call as to where that line is. But yeah, discussions of are when it isn't like a main theme of the episode, but when people do still talk about it. So it's the difference between getting punched in the face, someone talking about being punched in the face and what that felt like, and then a mention would be, I got punched in the face once, if that makes sense.
That totally makes sense. Thank you. Here's a new one from Christine Benner-Dixon. She asks, are content notes / content warnings the purview of the author or the publisher? Who decides what to warn about in your podcasts or your writing?
So it's with Rusty Quill, it was originally like a group of sort of 2 or 3 people at first, and then for a while it was just me, and then we decided to make it a much bigger shared task so that it could go through several different perspectives, and people at different stages could add different things. So that's how that worked. The first bit of it was, is it the responsibility of the creator or the publisher? Ooh, that's going to depend. That I think is going to be up to the relationship between said creator and said publisher. I have worked on a couple of books where the author has given content warnings, and like their editor / publisher has helped them to phrase them or word them. So that's been interesting. I think ideally it should be a combination of both, but I also think I think it's a shared responsibility. I think I'd put it like that.
Thank you. Okay, well, here's another question from me. You've mentioned the very many hats that you wear. Do you have a favorite?
Oh, oh gosh, I've never thought of it like that before. Um, I actually think the inclusion stuff is my favorite. Um, because a lot of it involves doing workshops and training and talking to people and doing stuff like this where people ask me questions and I can like try and help them. And I think, and that feels like a much more direct way of helping people and making a difference. Um, I don't think, I think everything that I do professionally is something that I think makes a difference. Um, but with sensitivity consultation, um, it's like it's a slow growing it's a slow impact thing where it's months down the line that the book might come out, and it's one of those, it's like what's that thing they say about soundtracks, like you'll notice if it's bad but probably not if it's good, if that makes sense. Like you notice if it's really good, but otherwise the music is incidental. And that I think that is how I feel about sensitivity consultation, because you'll notice if the book has turned out with like massive stereotypes and stuff in it, but if it doesn't have them, then so I guess I'm really rambling because I really have never thought about this before, but I guess I feel like my inclusion work is a job that involves like positively moving forward and contributing, and my sensitivity consultation work, if I do it well, is it like an absence of harm, if that makes sense. And so I think my inclusion work is where I feel most proactive. I hope
That
that makes
definitely
sense.
makes sense. Thank you. Sorry for stumping you there.
That's okay. Love to be stumped.
Um, all right, we've got another question from the audience from, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Ty Sky. Do you have any fiction or anything really recommendations? Anything knocking your socks off lately?
Ooh. Um, well, unfortunately, I don't get that much time to read because I read for a job. Um, the last thing I read was No Exit, which I think there's now a film of that on Disney Plus. Um, which I really liked at first, but it's one of those books where like every chapter ends in a cliffhanger, and so by the end of it, I was like, oh, another cliffhanger. So I guess I wouldn't actually recommend that too much. Although it's like a fun little ride. You'll get through it in like a few hours. Like it's an interesting thing. I recently rewatched all of Breaking Bad. That held up. So like I remembered it being good, but like it's the first time I've rewatched it since it first came out. And watching it again, I was like, wow, this is very good. This is a very, very good show. And that's not any sort of groundbreaking opinion, but I really liked that. And I liked El Camino, which was the sequel film that they did. And I'm going to restart Better Call Saul. Um what else has been knocking my socks off? Do you know what? The last piece of fiction I remember being completely immersed in and that I'm still sad there isn't more of um was a massive Downton Abbey fan fiction. So if you don't know, in Downton Abbey there's a butler called Thomas and he hates everyone and he's great and petty and mean. Um and he's also like one of the I think there's three queer characters total in the entire series, but he is the one constant gay character. And someone wrote this like 400,000 word slow burn fan fiction about Thomas in World War I and like being on the front and like what his experiences might be and just it was incredible and like really well researched and just excellent work. It was called Soldier's Heart. And I loved it. I loved it. I couldn't stop reading it.
You know we're taking notes here, so.
Oh, okay.
Um, well, I haven't got any more questions. Any more from the audience, guys? And I can see people pondering, typing furiously, I hope.
It's okay if not. We can all just go like have a nap.
We can have an app and then like drop into the pet slideshow and see a bunch of cute pets. It's a good time, I promise. But we've got you here, so. Oh, I did think of something. I thought of something from
Oh,
earlier that fell out of my head because my head is a colander lately. Sorry. Um, how did you actually get into the line of work that you're in? Like, what was your
oh,
path there?
completely by accident. Um, so I was in a very sort of unfulfilling career as a copywriter, like a marketing copywriter. Like I was writing blogs and headlines and adverts and stuff like that. Um, but my social life and personal life was extremely fulfilling. I was getting involved in political activism and in the uh, sort of indie gaming scene in London and developing friends there, friends that I still have now. Um, although lots of them have moved out of London, and I'm starting to think I'm going to be the last one left. Anyway, um, yeah, I made lots of friends. And one day, one of them was like, "Oh, you're a copywriter," and I was like, "Yes." And he was like, "Can you proofread this book for me?" And also, uh, this book is very much about people being oppressed, and I know that you know a lot about politics and about um, race and racial oppression and discrimination. So, can you give me your thoughts on that? And so that was my first sensitivity consultation project. And it just grew from there. I think it was mostly word of mouth. I went fully freelance in 2018. And then 2019, I joined Salt and Sage, which is a very good editorial services agency based in the US. I think I was one of their, I may have been the first British consultant that they brought on board. But yeah, since then, yeah, just kept growing from there, really. Oh yeah, and I set up my own website, and apparently that has pretty good SEO because, like I mentioned at the start, lots of journalists found me, um, and I was not expecting them to. Uh, so yeah, I think I accidentally got really good SEO on my website, and that helped.
All right, thank you. We've got another question from the audience, a couple of them actually. Let me see here. When in the publication process do you prefer to do your sensitivity reads? First draft, highly polished / almost done?
Ideally, it would be first draft. Um, uh, if you want to get a really, really deep dive one, it would be first draft and then final draft, because the first draft to pick up on any like big thematic or conceptual or narrative things that could be problematic. And I'm talking in terms of this character is continually being used just to prop up this other character, considered expanding their personality and stuff like that. Um, so there's that kind of thing, and then a final draft to really focusing on the details. But most of the time, I get it at first or second draft stage, like once it's already been proofread. And I leave a list of comments because I get them in Word docs usually. So I leave a list of comments about the specific vocabulary or phrases. And then I send an email with like a big overall feedback report thing where I say, okay, so this character or this setting, here's what I think. Or, I almost always have a miscellaneous setting where I've got um, a miscellaneous heading where I have like some bullet points of things that don't really fit anywhere, but I'm wondering about. Um, so yeah, you definitely don't want to get your sensitivity reading done just before. You don't want to get it done when it's highly polished, because if that's when you get your first sensitivity reading, like they might find a really big issue, and then you're going to have to go back and rewrite this thing that you've already put so much work into. So just for your own peace of mind, first or second draft, I think, is the best place.
One more quick question from the audience. This one's from Teague. And they ask, do you have any advice for other wildly multidisciplinary folks, specifically folks who love / create in many media?
Um, that's really that's a very broad question. I think honestly, my biggest piece of advice is one that I'm not fulfilling very well myself right now, but it's uh consume. I don't no, I don't want to use that word. Read, watch, view, participate, attend as many creative works as you can, if you have the opportunity to. And I absolutely include fan fiction in that. I also include YouTube videos in that because I have learned so much from like various YouTube essayists in terms of literary criticism and political theory and ways of analyzing and engaging with a text. So I think I would say that the best thing to do is to always be open to learning new things and to actively seek that out, and experience as many different kinds of art as you can, because that will in turn uh, give you more things to draw on for your own art, and it will make you think about different ways of doing things, and you'll be able to yeah, just broaden your mind, man, and all that.
And on that great note, we are basically out of time. Thank you so much for joining us, Helen. We
Thank you
were
so much for having
delighted to
me.
have you as our guest of honor and for this keynote.
Yay. I'm going to be on the panel on monstrous disharmonies in like an hour and a bit as well, so that's going to be good.
Awesome. Well, hope to see you there. We'll see if I
Yeah.
can make it, but hopefully, definitely other people will.